The square was alive with cruelty. Torches spat angry flames into the night air, their smoke curling like serpents above the heads of the gathered wolves. Rain fell hard, relentless, soaking cloaks and dripping from snarling mouths, but no one moved to leave. The people wanted blood. They wanted a spectacle. And they were about to get it. She stumbled as the iron chain around her wrists was yanked forward. Shackles rattled against her bones, cutting into skin already raw and bruised. Her husband walked beside her, not as a protector but as her captor, his chest puffed, his hand gripping the chain as though parading a trophy. His smirk widened with every eye that turned toward them. In that moment, she wasn't his wife. She wasn't even a woman. She was prey, dragged into the center of a ring that stank of wet fur, sweat, and blood. The rain should have washed her shame away, but instead it carried it deeper into her bones. The cold seeped into her skin, mingling with the fire of humiliation burning inside her. Her breaths came shallow and broken, each one rattling against the storm pressing down on her shoulders. And yet, even as her knees buckled under the uneven cobblestones, even as the jeers of the clan sliced through the night, her mind whispered a truth that refused to die: I was brought before the Alpha everyone was scared of, by the man who vowed to protect me. Her eyes darted across the faces of the crowd, searching for mercy, for pity, for anything resembling human decency. She found none. Only gleaming eyes, sharpened teeth, and hearts thrilled by her fall. They howled for punishment, their voices merging with the rain, a chorus of rage that left no room for hope. Her husband fed on their energy, raising his hand high, proud of the theater he had created. And when his palm came crashing down across her cheek, the sound echoed like thunder. The crowd erupted. Some laughed. Others spat. The sting burned, but the humiliation cut deeper. Her lips tasted of iron, her skin tingled where his hand had landed, and her heart cracked with the weight of betrayal. The man who once pressed kisses against her temples, who once swore never to let the world harm her, now offered her to the wolves with his own hand. He stood tall in his victory, as though the sight of her brokenness made him more of a man. Yet within her, a storm far greater than the one raging in the skies began to build. What no one in that square knew was that the fragile figure kneeling in chains was not fragile at all. Beneath the surface of torn garments and trembling limbs lived a mind sharpened by years of exile. Nights spent alone in wilderness had taught her to read the earth like scripture, the way branches cracked before a predator's step, the way shadows shifted against the moonlight, the way silence itself warned of danger. She had crafted weapons out of nothing but bones and stone. She had studied the markings left by wolves older than time, deciphering the codes hidden in their scratches. She had built strategies in solitude, mapping every fight she'd never been allowed to fight. Every cut on her skin told the story of survival. Every scar whispered of resilience. She was not weak. She was not broken. She was waiting. And tonight, though the crowd saw only a woman on her knees, chains biting her flesh, she knew a truth that none of them could see: her silence was not submission. It was preparation. Her gaze lifted, steady despite the swelling of her cheek. Her husband sneered down at her, expecting tears, expecting collapse. Instead, she stared through him, as if his cruelty was already a fading shadow. In her chest, her heart beat not with fear but with defiance. And in her mind, a vow took shape, bright and sharp as lightning splitting the storm. Touch me again, and the world will see the truth of who I am. The roar of the clan grew louder, demanding more, hungry for the sight of her destroyed. Their voices pressed in from all sides, and yet the sound became distant, drowned beneath the pounding rhythm of her own determination. She was humiliated, yes. She was bleeding, yes. But she was not defeated. She had learned in exile that the world would always try to silence a woman who refused to bend. That the ones who feared her strength would always mask their terror with violence. But she had also learned that silence was not the same as surrender. Silence could be strategy. And strategy could win wars. Her lips parted, though no sound escaped them, only the whisper of her spirit: if you've ever longed for stories where women rise from the fire, subscribe to Sophie's Romance Collections. Because no one silences us forever. And as the rain poured harder, as the torches hissed and sputtered, and as the crowd demanded her end, she straightened her spine despite the chains, eyes burning like coals in the darkness. The night believed it was watching a woman brought low. But in truth, it was witnessing the birth of something the clan had never seen before. Something unstoppable. Something dangerous. And it began right there, in the center of that merciless square. The air shifted before anyone saw him. It wasn't the storm, though thunder rolled over the hills like a beast awakening. It wasn't the firelight, though torches bent and hissed as though bowing to something greater. It was the silence. A silence so sharp it sliced through the roar of the crowd, pressing down on every chest, freezing every hand raised to jeer. Thousands of voices were swallowed at once, as if the world itself had been commanded to hush. And then he came. The brutal Lycan King. His steps were measured, each one striking against the stones with the weight of inevitability. He did not rush, did not swagger. He moved like a storm contained in flesh, like violence carefully leashed. Rain clung to the scars that cut across his arms and throat, scars that no healing could erase, the kind that spoke of battles fought until only he was left standing. His presence was not an introduction. It was a verdict. Eyes followed him, wide, afraid, reverent. Wolves who moments ago bellowed for blood now lowered their gazes, their spines bowing as though their instincts remembered something their minds dared not. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Even the torches seemed to recoil from him, casting their flames away rather than toward his form. The woman in chains lifted her head, and for the first time that night, her breath caught for a reason other than pain. His figure cut through the storm like a blade, a man wrapped in shadows but carrying the unmistakable gravity of authority. She had heard of him. Everyone had. Stories painted him as merciless, as iron in human form, a ruler who had broken his enemies with his bare hands and left their bones to rot as warnings. He was not the kind of savior a woman prayed for. He was the kind of monster whispered about in the dark, the one who could end suffering with the same ease he inflicted it. And yet, he looked at her. Not at the crowd. Not at her husband, puffed with arrogance. Not even at the chains biting her skin. His gaze locked on her as if she were the only figure in the square. It was not gentle, not kind. It was fierce, probing, heavy with something that made her chest tighten. He saw her. Not as a prisoner. Not as a victim. But as something else entirely. Her husband stiffened, pride flickering into unease. He yanked the chain hard, pulling her forward, eager to prove his dominance before the king's eyes. The crowd gasped as his arm rose again, his palm ready to strike, to make a spectacle of his power. But the blow never came. The Lycan King's voice cut through the square, deep and cold, a sound that made the very stones tremble. "Touch her again," he said, every word a blade drawn slow, deliberate, final, and suffer. The husband froze. His arm hung in the air, trembling now, every ounce of bravado leaking from his veins. The crowd held its breath, the silence so absolute it seemed even the rain dared not fall for a heartbeat. The woman's chest rose and fell, her breath caught between disbelief and something dangerously close to hope. She didn't trust him, how could she? His reputation was carved in cruelty, not mercy. Yet there was no mistaking the fire in his words. Fierce. Final. Protective. It wasn't softness. It was justice, brutal and uncompromising. Her skin prickled with the awareness of him. The distance between them was filled with tension so thick it felt like a rope drawn tight, ready to snap. She wanted to look away, to shrink beneath his gaze, but she couldn't. His eyes, dark as midnight, refused to release her. In them, she read not pity but recognition, as though the whispers of her skills, the stories she thought forgotten, had traveled to him. He knew. She didn't know how, didn't know why, but she felt it in her bones. He knew she was more than the broken figure on her knees. He knew of the mind that had survived exile, the hands that had carved weapons from nothing, the heart that still beat with the strength to endure. The storm around them raged on, but the true storm now stood in the center of the square. His presence demanded submission, but his eyes, those unyielding, dangerous eyes, spoke to something else. To possibility. To a fire that could either consume her or free her. Her husband lowered his hand at last, his bravado shattered. He tried to speak, but his words died under the weight of the king's stare. The chains rattled as her wrists trembled, not from fear this time but from the strange, undeniable pull between her and the man who had just altered the course of her fate with a single sentence. She distrusted him. She feared him. But buried beneath the storm of emotions, a spark of something else flickered, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. The possibility that justice, even brutal justice, could stand beside her rather than against her. And though the crowd did not yet know it, the night had already changed. Because the brutal Lycan King had spoken. And his eyes had chosen her. The chain at her wrists was heavy, but the weight of memory pressed far deeper. Kneeling in the mud beneath the Lycan King's gaze, her thoughts tore loose and drifted backward, dragged by the relentless pull of everything that had led her here. The rain blurred the square, the crowd snarls dimmed, and in their place rose echoes of a past she had tried to bury. She remembered the night her clan had cast her out. The elders had stood tall against the firelight, their voices sharp with condemnation, their eyes refusing to see anything but danger in her. They said she was unpredictable, too clever, too questioning. Wolves were meant to follow, not to dissect every rule, not to ask why old marks scarred the stones of their shrines or why the hunt always obeyed one rhythm when the land whispered another. She had been young, but her mind was restless, and restlessness in a woman was treated as rebellion. They had branded her a risk. Too dangerous to keep, too stubborn to break. The sting of exile had never left her skin. Alone in the wilderness, without a pack to shelter her, she had been forced to carve life from stone and claw. She remembered the nights her stomach twisted with hunger, when the cold gnawed at her bones and silence pressed like a predator at her back. Yet she did not die. She adapted. She watched the forests and learned their secrets, traced claw marks left on bark by wolves older than memory, and pieced together patterns others had forgotten. She mapped the constellations, not for beauty but for survival, charting the movements of prey and the turning of seasons. Her hands had hardened into tools. Branches and bone became weapons under her fingers, crude at first, then sharper, deadlier. Snares built from scraps fed her when the hunt failed. Herbs crushed between her palms healed wounds no one else was there to tend. The wilderness was merciless, but it became her teacher. Every scar along her arms was a lesson written in flesh. Pain could destroy, or it could instruct. She chose instruction. Still, exile was not her only torment. Memory dragged her deeper, into the cage of her marriage. Her husband had been chosen for her, a union meant to silence her rebellion by binding her to a man who would control her. He had played the role of provider at first, offering food, shelter, the illusion of safety. But beneath it lay fists, commands, and chains disguised as vows. He thought cruelty would bend her into obedience, that humiliation would strip her of the fire she carried. He had underestimated her. She remembered his voice ordering her to train in secret, mocking her efforts as though she were nothing but entertainment. He forced her into drills, timed her endurance, ridiculed her every move. Yet she learned. Every insult was catalogued, every correction woven into skill. He thought he was proving her weakness. In truth, he was shaping her into something far sharper than he intended. Nights when he left her broken and bruised, she stayed awake, replaying each strike in her mind, studying angles, memorizing the weight of blows. She taught herself how to anticipate, how to shift balance, how to make speed matter more than brute strength. He saw failure when she staggered. She saw opportunity when she rose again. Her heart clenched at the thought of those years stolen, years wasted on trying to be small enough to survive. And yet, those years had also honed her. She had taken cruelty and turned it into armor. She had taken exile and made it her education. Everything meant to destroy her had instead sharpened her. And now here she was, before the brutal king himself, her secrets hidden beneath chains and mud. She doubted still. Doubt clung to her like the rain, whispering that she was nothing more than the sum of her wounds, that the fire she carried was only ash in the eyes of others. The crowd saw weakness. Her husband saw property. Even she, in the hollow hours of night, sometimes believed the lie that she was nothing but the broken exile her clan had named her. But the king's eyes told her otherwise. They lingered on her not with pity, but with a searching intensity that made her chest ache. He looked at her as though he recognized the storm inside her, as though the scars on his body could read the scars on her spirit. His gaze was not gentle, it was sharp, demanding, like a man accustomed to finding strength in unexpected places. Where others saw a woman bowed in chains, he seemed to see something coiled, waiting, dangerous. She felt exposed under that look, as if the layers of silence and endurance she had built around herself were suddenly transparent. For the first time, someone was not dismissing her fire as threat or weakness. He was acknowledging it. Naming it. Almost daring it to rise. And that terrified her. Because recognition meant possibility. It meant she could no longer hide behind invisibility, no longer pretend she was only what they accused her of being. If he saw fire, if he demanded fire, then she would have to choose whether to step into it fully or let it consume her from within. The rain continued to fall, blurring the torches, streaking her hair across her face. The chains cut deeper, her wrists aching with the weight of the iron. Around her, the crowd shifted uneasily, caught between fear of their king and the desire to see her broken. Her husband stood stiff, his pride wounded, his eyes darting between her and the man who had undone his display with a single command. And she knelt there, drenched, shivering, her body aching, her mind spiraling through memory and torment. But beneath it all, one truth pulsed steady, insistent, undeniable. She had survived. She had endured exile, cruelty, hunger, and betrayal. She had crafted life from scraps, learned from pain, turned weakness into skill. She was not the woman they believed her to be. She was not the fragile thing her husband dragged before the square. And though doubt still whispered at her edges, though her heart still trembled beneath the king's gaze, she could not shake the thought that perhaps, just perhaps, he saw the truth she had always carried but never spoken. That the fire in her was not a threat. It was her power. The ruins of the old arena loomed above her, jagged stone teeth gnawing at the sky. Torches burned along the crumbling walls, their flames casting restless shadows across cracked columns and weed-choked sand. The place reeked of history, of battles fought long before her birth, of blood spilled by slaves who had been forced to kill for the amusement of kings. Tonight, she stood where the condemned had once been dragged, the iron doors groaning open to vomit her into the circle. The crowd pressed close. Wolves in cloaks, elders with their grim expressions, warriors with restless eyes. They expected spectacle. They expected her humiliation. The scent of their anticipation clung to the air like smoke. She stood barefoot in the dirt, the scars on her ankles still raw from chains. Her body trembled, not with fear but with the taut awareness of prey forced into the open. The Lycan King sat above it all, in a stone seat worn smooth by centuries of rulers. His eyes, that piercing storm of silver and ash, followed her every breath. The first warrior entered. A giant of a man, shoulders wide as gates, carrying a blade longer than her arm. The crowd howled, fists hammering stone. They expected blood to fall quickly. They expected her to be another body to feed the earth. But she moved. Not with brute strength, not with fury. She slipped sideways, her bare feet silent on the sand. Her eyes locked on the angle of his grip, the twitch of his wrist, the slight lean of his weight. She remembered nights in the forest, watching wolves stalk prey, each shift of their paws telling a story. His story was written in his stance. When he swung, she was already behind him. The blade struck sand, sparks biting the air. She seized a shard of broken column, jagged and heavy, and rammed it against his elbow joint with precise force. A sickening crack tore through the silence. The warrior howled, the blade clattering free. Before he could recover, she drove her knee into the back of his leg and sent him crashing to the ground. The arena erupted. She did not wait. Another warrior came, this one faster, his movements sharp, trained. He lunged with twin daggers, his strikes a blur of silver. She ducked, rolled, let him chase her in circles until his breath grew ragged. Then she pivoted, using his momentum to twist one dagger free, spinning it in her hand as though it had always belonged to her. With a single slash she cut the ties of his belt, forcing him to clutch his slipping armor instead of striking. The crowd roared with laughter at his humiliation, but her face remained steel. The Lycan King leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his eyes never leaving her. She fought not with strength but with sight. She read every twitch of muscle, every shift of stance. She dismantled warriors as though they were puzzles to be solved. Their blades became hers, their fury their downfall. She struck not to kill, but to disarm, to humiliate, to expose. She predicted them before they acted, as though she were pulling the threads of time itself. Whispers spread through the stands. She moves like she's seen this all before. No, she knows before it happens. Prophecy. The word slithered like a serpent through the crowd, picking up speed, striking ears, igniting superstition. Wolves were creatures of legend, and prophecy was their poison and their obsession. To them, her defiance of warriors was not skill but omen. But the king's voice cut through the noise, low and sharp. Not prophecy, he said, his tone carrying across the arena like iron dragged over stone. Not blood. Skill. The crowd stilled. He rose from his seat, his shadow stretching long across the broken sand. His eyes burned with the kind of certainty that allowed no contradiction. This is what makes her dangerous. Not fate. Not stars. She chooses. She learns. She endures. That is her power. The word struck her harder than any blow. All her life, others had tried to shape her into something less. Her clan had named her cursed. Her husband had named her weak. Even she, in the hollow of her doubts, had feared she was nothing but what they said she was. But here, before thousands, the most feared Lycan alive stripped her of prophecy, stripped her of superstition, and named her for what she truly was, herself. Her knees weakened. She clenched her fists to steady them, nails biting her palms. To hear it spoken, to be seen not as omen or curse but as choice, the weight of it nearly undid her. More warriors came. She faced them all. She disarmed a spear-bearer by breaking the haft against the stone and using the splinters to blind him. She stripped a sword from a young fighter by reading the exact moment his grip faltered in sweat. She wove between them, her breath ragged, her body trembling, but her mind sharp, unyielding. By the time the last warrior knelt in the sand, gasping, weaponless, she stood surrounded by broken steel and shattered pride. Her chest heaved, her hair clung to her damp skin, and the arena floor was littered with the remains of weapons she had turned against their masters. The murmurs shifted. She's no criminal. She could lead an army. She's worth more than half the council. The words were dangerous, heavier than the chains she once wore. She felt the shift in the air, the way the crowd's hunger turned. No longer did they want her death. Now they wanted her power, wanted to claim her, to wield her like a blade. And through it all, the Lycan King's eyes never left her. He did not smile. He did not soften. But there was something in his gaze that carved into her deeper than any weapon. Recognition. Calculation. Something more primal beneath it, something that made her pulse thunder in her ears. She straightened, shoulders squared, refusing to bow even as her body screamed with exhaustion. She would not kneel. Not here, Not now, not when the weight of her entire past pressed behind her. For the first time in her life, she was not being judged by prophecy, by clan, by husband, by fate. She was being judged by her choices. And for the first time, she realized, she could win. The marketplace had never been quiet, not in living memory. It was a place of trade, of voices raised in barter, of children darting through alleyways, of wolf-blooded vendors selling their wares under the weight of centuries-old watchtowers. But that morning, the noise was not barter. It was accusation. Word had spread like wildfire. What she had done in the gladiator ruins, how she had dismantled warriors with nothing but foresight and skill, how she had risen from chains to stand unbroken in the sand, none of it had been buried by silence. Wolves whispered her name at dawn. By noon, her name had become a weapon. And by dusk, it had drawn rivals like blood in water. The king arrived first. His presence was the kind that silenced wolves mid-sentence, that bent heads and stiffened backs. His silver gaze swept across the marketplace-turned arena, every stall cleared, every merchant forced to stand behind the outer ring of guards. The stones were wet with rain, reflecting torchlight that painted the air in restless amber. He had not called for this gathering. Others had. From the shadows of the council hall, rival alphas stepped forward, each one cloaked in the arrogance of their bloodlines, each one eager to strike at the king not with claws but with rumor. She twists the air around her, one sneered, voice carrying. What warrior disarms 10 men and walks away untouched? No mortal woman holds that kind of foresight. Witchcraft. Deception. She toys with us, and through her, she toys with you, king. The crowd shivered. Superstition clung to wolves as tightly as their fangs. A murmur swelled like a tide, faces twisting, suspicion hardening into fear. Another alpha, older, scarred across the jaw, stepped forward. She is not strength. She is trickery. The moment you claim her as useful, the moment you place her near your throne, she will poison it. She manipulates you already. Then the most venomous voice of all. Her husband. Dragged forward, his wrists bound yet his tongue unchained, he spat words like acid. You fools don't see it, do you? She makes herself look small, look broken, so you lower your guard. That's her gift, deception. I lived with her lies. I trained her, and she hid her skill until the night it suited her to show it. Do not be fooled, king. She will outsmart you as easily as she humiliated those warriors. And when she does, your crown will be ash. The crowd erupted, torn between doubt and awe, suspicion and curiosity. Wolves howled in fury, others jeered, others cried out for her blood. The air itself shook with the force of their unrest. The king did not rise. Not yet. His gaze slid to her where she stood in the circle, chains heavy at her wrists, rain slicking her hair against her face. His silence was a blade, cutting the noise into sharper edges. Then he spoke. Low. Cold. Each word measured. You claim she manipulates. You claim she deceives. Then let her prove herself again. Not in ruins. Not in whispers. Here. Before all. The ground shifted beneath her feet. The crowd roared. The council nodded. The rivals smiled, knowing they had cornered her. Another battle, staged not in forgotten ruins but in the heart of the pack's life, where every wolf, elder, and child would watch. If she fell, she would fall not as criminal but as fraud. The circle widened. Stones scraped as vendors were shoved aside, their stalls broken down to clear space. Warriors stepped forward, each one heavier, stronger, hungrier for her fall. Her chest tightened. Her pulse throbbed in her ears. She could feel their eyes, the rivals, the elders, the king, her husband's poisonous glare. She was nothing more than a woman standing barefoot in the mud. No claws, no fangs, no shifting strength. But she had her mind. The first warrior lunged. She let him come. She turned, weaving between overturned barrels, knocking one aside with her hip. The barrel rolled, splintering against the stones, spilling nails and shards of glass across the ground. He stumbled, his foot caught, his balance broken. She struck his shoulder, driving him down, seizing his own blade before he could recover. The crowd gasped. Another charged. She ducked behind the frame of a broken cart, snapping one will free with brutal precision. She used it as shield and snare, catching his arm in the spokes, twisting until the bone gave a sharp crack. His scream echoed, but she did not pause. She moved with desperate clarity, each breath a calculation. She knew wolf hierarchies, the instinct of dominance that drove every alpha to prove themselves. She baited them, let them compete with each other for the right to strike her, made their arrogance fight against itself. Two clashed in their rush to be first, snarling at each other instead of at her. She slid between them, leaving them to tear at one another while she dismantled the third with a rope pulled from a fallen stall. The marketplace became a labyrinth of weapons and traps. A spilled bag of flour blinded one fighter. A broken ladder became a lever to upend another. Even wet cobblestones became allies, slick under heavy boots while her bare feet found silent purchase. She fought not like wolf, but like storm, shaping the chaos, bending it, breaking those who believed brute force ruled all. Her body screamed with exhaustion, muscles burning, lungs raw, but she did not stop. One by one they fell. Not dead, not destroyed, but humiliated, stripped of weapons, groaning in the mud. The crowd's roar shifted. It was no longer simple bloodlust. It was confusion. It was awe. It was the whisper of something dangerous taking root. And then, her husband's voice, cutting through it all. "Do you not see it?" he screamed, straining against his bonds. "She deceives you all. Look how she makes you believe. Today she humiliates your warriors. Tomorrow she will humiliate your king." The words hung like smoke. Suspicion thickened. The rival alphas smiled, sensing the crowd sway. The king rose at last. His steps were measured as he descended into the circle, his shadow long, his presence swallowing the air. He did not look at the warriors groaning in the dirt. He looked only at her. His voice was a blade. "You have proven skill. But skill does not erase suspicion. Skill does not silence fear." Her chest tightened. She felt the weight of 1,000 eyes pressing down, waiting for his judgment, waiting for her fall. Then his decree struck. "Remove her." The words cleaved through her like steel. Guards moved instantly, their hands closing on her arms, dragging her back toward the shadows beyond the circle. The crowd erupted, some in triumph, some in protest, all in hunger for what came next. She did not fight them. She did not cry out. She let the cold bite of iron close around her wrists, let the jeers crash against her like waves. But inside, her vow burned brighter than any torch. "I will not break. Not by rivals. Not by alphas. Not even by the king." Her choices had carried her this far. Her choices would carry her further still. And as the chains pulled her away, her eyes lifted once more to his. For a breath, for a heartbeat, she swore she saw it, the flicker of something not cold, not dominant, not cruel. Something sharper. Something uncertain. Then it was gone. But her vow remained. She would not break. Never. The cell was colder than night should ever be. Stone walls sweating with damp, iron biting into her wrists where shackles bound her, straw beneath her knees scratching at skin already torn by the marketplace battle. She had thought she would be left to rot, forgotten in the darkness like any other condemned woman. But then the footsteps came. Slow. Heavy. Each one carrying the weight of command. The Lycan King stepped into the firelit gloom. He did not wear the armor of ceremony. Tonight, he was only a man cloaked in shadow, the flicker of the torch pulling harsh lines across his face. His scars glowed red gold beneath the light, carved across his chest, across his arms, down his jaw, scars not of one battle but of a lifetime of brutality. He looked at her, not with the cold detachment of judgment, but with something far more dangerous, silence that searched. She straightened, though her wrists screamed against iron. She would not bow. She would not shrink. He moved closer, crouching before her with a basin of water and strips of linen. No command. No words. Just the sound of water sloshing as he dipped the cloth, wrung it tight, and reached for her face. The first touch was not gentle. He pressed the damp cloth against her cheek where the skin had split, wiping away dried blood. She flinched, breath catching at the sting, but she did not look away. His eyes lifted, holding hers. Silver in the firelight, sharp as blades, soft as confession. "I've seen warriors fall with less defiance," he murmured. "And yet here you sit, unbroken." Her voice came raw. "Because breaking is a choice. One I won't give you." The corner of his mouth curved, not into a smile, but into something harder to read. Almost respect. Almost hunger. He moved to her wrists, prying at the iron, sliding the cloth beneath to keep the metal from cutting deeper as he examined the bruises. His hands were large, rough with calluses, but careful in ways she had not expected. "Your wounds will fester if left," he said quietly. "Even the strongest fall to rot." "And would that please you?" she asked, bitterness sharp in her throat. His gaze darkened. "No. Your death would please my enemies. And I will not hand them their victory." She studied him then, truly studied, the lines carved by years of war, the heaviness in his shoulders, the firelight catching the shadows beneath his eyes. His strength was obvious, but it was the weight he carried that unsettled her most. This was not a man untouched by pain. This was a man who lived with it, carried it, wore it like armor. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the torch, the whisper of cloth against skin. Finally, he spoke again, voice lower, as though speaking to the shadows rather than to her. "They think me monster. Some days I think the same. But the scars," his eyes flicked down to his chest, to the jagged ridges slashing across his ribs. "The scars are not only here." His hand lifted, hovering above his heart but never touching. "They run deeper." Her breath caught. He wasn't boasting. He wasn't threatening. He was confessing. And yet, she would not be another wolf who bowed to him. Her chin lifted. "Scars don't make you monster. Choices do. And you've made plenty." For a heartbeat, silence. Then a low sound, half a laugh, half a growl. Not mocking, not cruel. Almost, alive. "You speak to me as if I am not king," he said, leaning closer, his breath warm against her skin. She did not flinch. "Because no crown changes what you are when no one's watching." The fire crackled louder, as though feeding on the tension sparking between them. His hand lingered at her wrist longer than necessary, thumb brushing against her pulse before he released the iron and leaned back. The basin of water was nearly empty now, stained pink with her blood. He set it aside, but his eyes never left her. "You intrigue me," he said softly, almost to himself. "Not for prophecy. Not for chains. For this fire you carry, this refusal to kneel." Her heart thundered in her chest, too loud, too certain. She should have feared him. She should have hated him. Yet here, in the silence between words, something else coiled in the air. Something that made it hard to breathe. His hand lifted, not commanding, not forcing, just hovering near her jaw. The space between them burned. "I see you," he whispered. "All of you. Not as prophecy. Not as a slave. As a woman who cannot be caged." Her lips parted, though no words came. The firelight flickered, throwing gold across his face, across hers, binding them in the fragile space where silence says more than words. For a moment, she let herself drown in it, the rawness of his eyes, the warmth of his nearness, the impossible truth that the man she should fear most saw her not as weapon, not as pawn, but as woman. Their faces drew closer. The air between them tightened, charged, trembling. And then, he pulled back. Just enough to leave the air aching, just enough to leave her heart clawing against its cage. The bond lingered, unresolved, heavier than touch, sharper than any kiss could have been. He rose, his shadow stretching long against the wall, and with one last look, he turned toward the door. The firelight dimmed as he stepped away, but the echo of his words remained, carved into her chest like a brand. I see you. All of you. And for the first time, she wasn't sure which terrified her more, his power, or the way he had stripped her soul bare with nothing but his gaze. The arena still trembled with dust and fractured stone as her figure disappeared into the stormy night. The cries of the crowd were still echoing, their fury bleeding into the broken air like a hymn of damnation. And yet, the silence left in her wake was louder than their roars. Every elder, every rival, every wolf that had spat her name in venom now stood haunted by the sight of her fire. She had not begged. She had not surrendered. She had torn herself from their chains and carved a path of her own making. That, more than her alleged crimes, left them unsettled. The king stood frozen on the shattered dais, shards of stone crunching beneath his boots. His warriors demanded pursuit. The council demanded her head. His rivals fanned the flames, howling accusations that she had bewitched him, weakened him, played him like the others she had outwitted. But his silence unnerved them more than any denial. Because silence from him meant war was boiling behind his scars. He remembered her eyes as she fled, the rawness of betrayal, the sharp edge of heartbreak. She had looked at him as though he had wielded the blade himself, though he had spoken no sentence. That wound cut deeper than her husband's lies, deeper than the council's decree. For the first time in years, the king found himself powerless. Not in strength, but in trust. He had almost let her in. He had almost kissed her beneath the firelight. And now, she was gone, carrying with her a part of him he had never meant to give. The night wrapped her in cold arms as she stumbled across the wild expanse, breath ragged, ribs aching from the council's blows. Her hands trembled, but her mind sharpened with every step. She replayed every accusation, every cheer for her death, every flicker of hesitation in the king's eyes. She had wanted him to fight for her. She had wanted him to defy them, to choose her openly. But he had faltered. That falter was a knife she could not unfeel. Her husband's words rang like poison in her skull. Forbidden scrolls. Traitor. Thief. He had twisted truth into venom, weaponizing her hunger for knowledge. She had stolen, yes. She had read what she was not allowed to read, touched what she was forbidden to touch. But not for betrayal. For survival. For freedom. For the strength to never be caged again. They had condemned her not because she was a traitor, but because she was proof that their chains could be broken. Blood dripped from her palms, cut open by jagged stone, but she pressed onward, deeper into the shadowed forest. Branches tore her skin, yet she welcomed the sting. Pain reminded her she was still alive. Pain was honest where people were not. Every scar was a ledger of betrayal survived. She would add this night to the tally. Behind her, the king finally broke his silence. His command tore through the council chamber like thunder, no one was to pursue her without his order. Rivals snarled. Alphas slammed their fists in protest. But none disobeyed. His voice carried the authority of a storm, unyielding. Yet even as he spoke, a gnawing truth twisted inside him, he had hesitated. She would never forget it. Perhaps she would never forgive it. He withdrew to the solitude of his chamber, but solitude offered no peace. The firelight clawed shadows across the walls, whispering of her face, her defiance, her untamed spirit. For years he had seen warriors bend to his will, bow to his dominance, break beneath his gaze. But she had met his scars with her own, unflinching. She had not feared him, she had seen him. And in doing so, had left him more exposed than any enemy's blade. She pressed through the forest until her legs nearly collapsed beneath her. At the edge of a cliff, overlooking a valley drowned in fog, she stopped. Her chest heaved, her lips trembling against the weight of grief and fury tangled within. She wanted to scream, to tear her throat raw with the sound of it. But silence had always been her armor. She bit it back, teeth grinding, as the first tear streaked down her dirt-stained cheek. Not weakness, release. Just enough to keep walking. Memories assaulted her, her clan casting her out, her husband chaining her with false vows, the council branding her with lies. And the king, his silence. She had survived worse. She would survive this too. But a part of her, small and fragile, whispered that his silence had hurt more than the blows. That somewhere within her, she had wanted him to choose her above all else. And yet, another voice, harder, colder, cut through. You need no savior. You never did. You will not crawl back. You will not beg. The prophecy was nothing. Her bloodline was nothing. Her exile, her shame, her forbidden scrolls, everything they feared was the truth. She was dangerous because she was herself. And for that, they would always hunt her. Very well, then. Let them. She would no longer flee like prey. She would build herself into something even kings would dread to lose. The king, sleepless, left his chamber and descended into the silent training grounds. Alone beneath the moonlight, he struck at phantom enemies, fists breaking stone, claws carving scars into the earth. Every strike was a war with himself. He had ruled through dominance, through fear, through scars that silenced doubt. But with her, none of it mattered. She had pierced through his armor without ever raising a hand. And now he had lost her. Not because she was taken, but because he had hesitated when she needed him most. The night stretched long, carrying both of them in opposite directions, yet bound by the weight of what had unraveled. She walked with fury in her veins, forging herself anew with every step. He stood with regret hollowing his chest, haunted by her eyes and the storm they left behind. Neither could escape the tether between them, though it now burned like a wound that refused to close. And in the silence of that wound, destiny shifted. Not prophecy. Not blood. But choice. The first light of dawn did not bring peace. It carried fire. The ground shook beneath the march of enemies, shadows of rival clans converging with beasts unleashed from chains older than memory. Their howls tore through the valley like war drums, and the air thickened with the scent of blood long before the first blade was drawn. The stronghold braced for impact, children hidden, warriors steeled, the king himself already at the vanguard, scars burning with the promise of war. Yet even his presence did not still the tremor of fear that rippled through the clan. The attack fell swift and merciless. Stone walls splintered. Fire painted the sky in streaks of red and gold. Screams collided with steel, with claw, with bone snapping under the weight of war. The king tore through ranks with fury, each strike breaking bodies, each roar shaking the battlefield, but still the tide pressed forward. Too many. Too cunning. The council faltered. Warriors stumbled. And then. She returned. No armor. No banners. No army at her back. Only her body, bruised but unbroken, and her mind sharpened by exile. From the smoke she emerged, wielding not steel forged in fire, but weapons carved in desperation, stone lashed to wood, traps fashioned from fragments of the earth. The crowd of enemies, and even the clan, stilled for a heartbeat, stunned by her audacity. She had fled condemned, branded, betrayed. And yet she had returned not as a supplicant, not as prey, but as something else entirely. The first beast lunged. She did not meet its fangs with brute force. She redirected it, angled her body low, forced its momentum into a pit she had carved beneath the roots of the forest floor the night before, her foresight woven into the soil itself. The ground collapsed beneath its weight, swallowing its roar into silence. Warriors gasped. The king turned his head, just enough to see her, eyes burning with the storm that exile had not broken but refined. Enemies swarmed her. She did not flinch. Every step she took bent chaos into design. She maneuvered them into each other, turned their strength against itself. Where they swung, she made them collide. Where they struck, she was already elsewhere, baiting them into snares hidden in plain sight. A single strand of rope twisted between rubble tripped an alpha into the arc of his own ally's blade. An abandoned shield deflected not one but two arrows back into the throats of the archers who loosed them. She had no claws, no towering shift of a beast, but intellect had become her weapon, and with it, she carved survival into victory. The clan watched in disbelief as the tide began to change. Every life she saved became a testament, every fallen enemy a witness to her defiance. Children shielded behind stone were pulled to safety by her hands. Warriors too bloody to stand were given new breath under her orders. Even in the heart of carnage, she commanded, not with dominance, but with precision, strategies flowing from her lips that even seasoned alphas obeyed without thought. She had no title, yet the battlefield bent to her voice. And then, the moment came. Her husband, his face twisted in rage, in disbelief that the woman he had beaten, chained, silenced, now stood untouchable before him. He pushed through the bodies, cutting down allies and enemies alike in his desperation to reach her. His howl split the sky as he raised his blade, the same blade once pressed to her skin in the name of control. She did not retreat. She stood rooted, storm gathering in her chest. His strikes fell heavy, brute force raining down like thunder. She met each with defiance, redirecting, parrying not with strength but with angles, with leverage, with the knowledge he himself had forced into her bones through years of cruel training. Every lash he had given her became the counter to his blow. Every scar was her weapon. Until at last, she forced him to stumble, his chest exposed, his rage unchecked. Her makeshift blade, stone-bound to wood, pressed against his throat. Silence rippled through the battlefield. Enemy and ally alike froze at the sight, breath held in the fragile space between life and death. Her husband snarled, spitting venom, screaming that she was nothing, always nothing. That she would crawl again, bow again, break again. Her voice cut sharper than any steel. I am not your victim. I am not your sacrifice. I am the storm you created. The words did not tremble. They rolled across the battlefield like thunder, carried by every ear, burned into every heart. She pressed him down until his knees struck the blood-soaked earth. The strength he had claimed to own in her was shattered, and all who saw it understood, she had remade herself into something he could never cage again. The Lycan King watched. His chest rose, ragged with the weight of battle, but his eyes were locked on her, on the power not gifted by prophecy or bloodline, but earned in defiance of both. He saw her not as the council's traitor, not as her husband's wife, not even as his almost lover. He saw her as she was now, sovereign of her own will, forged in fire, untouchable in spirit. The battlefield shifted. Murmurs spread first as disbelief, then as something heavier, acknowledgement. The people did not see a criminal now. They saw the woman who had turned Dawn's slaughter into survival, who had faced her abuser and claimed her power without flinching. They saw not destiny, but choice. Not a chosen one, but one who had chosen herself. Her husband lay trembling beneath her, undone by the storm he had tried to own. And above him, framed in the smoke and fire of a war that should have ended them all, she stood not as prey, not as prophecy, but as proof that chains could be broken. And the world, king, clan, and enemy alike, would never see her the same way again. The battlefield lay in ruin, the dawn sun breaking over the wreckage as though light itself dared to intrude upon the blood-soaked earth. Smoke rose in thin, aching spirals, carrying the metallic tang of death, the sharp burn of fire, the bitter taste of survival. Warriors staggered, children clung to their mothers, and the dead were counted in silence. Yet amidst it all, one image seared itself into every eye, the woman standing, breathless, unyielding, with her makeshift blade still dripping with the life she had claimed back for herself. The world stilled. The clash of steel, the cries of the wounded, even the echo of flames, all seemed to fade, as though time itself bent to her defiance. And in that silence, her gaze found the king. His body bore fresh wounds, his breath came ragged, his chest smeared with the gore of countless enemies. Yet none of that could steal the gravity in his eyes. The Lycan King, the terror and law of this land, the one who had been bred from fire and war, now looked at her as though she had risen from the ashes not as a woman, but as something more, something the world had never seen. His lips parted, and in a voice raw with awe and weight, he whispered. "You've changed everything." The words hung between them, not carried on shouts, not stamped by law, but given quietly, intimately, dangerously. His voice was not for the council, nor for the rivals who bled on the earth around them. His voice was for her alone. But the crowd had their own voice, and it rose like a tide. Murmurs licked through the air, whispers sharp and dangerous. Savior, some called her, brave, unbroken, the storm that turned death away from their gates. Destroyer, others spat, their eyes filled with fear at the power she had shown, a power that could not be leashed, not even by their king. The council huddled, their robes darkened with dust and blood, their eyes trembling with unease. They muttered of rebellion, of danger, of a woman whose strength was not given by divine prophecy but seized by her own defiance. To them, she was an affront to order itself. To others, she was the sign they had waited for, the proof that survival was not in submission, but in fire, in will, in choosing to rise. The king did not silence them. He did not raise his voice above theirs. He simply held her gaze, as if the noise of the world did not matter, as if the only truth that remained was written in the way she stood before him. His chest heaved, his jaw clenched, but his eyes, they burned with something that unsettled even him. For she had undone him. Not with prophecy, not with submission, but with the raw, undeniable truth that she had fought with nothing but her own hands, her own mind, her own fury, and she had prevailed. No chains, no laws, no bloodline could explain her. And in that truth lay danger. For if one woman could rise, then who else could follow? The silence stretched long enough to break hearts. The clan looked to their king, to his scars, to his throne, to the strength that had always decided for them. But still, he did not speak. He only let the weight of his words earlier linger, his whisper echoing in her ears. "You've changed everything." Her breath trembled, though her body did not falter. She could feel it, the split in the air, the fragile crack where her fate dangled between salvation and destruction. She was no longer invisible, no longer a prisoner, no longer the outcast who fought in shadows. She was seen. Too seen. And so the questions began to rise, not only in the murmurs of the crowd but in the hearts of every listener, every soul who dared to wonder. Would you call her savior, if she had bled for your children, if she had stood against the beasts when all others faltered? Or would you call her destroyer, for daring to claim power that should never belong to her, for standing unbound when the world demanded chains? Would you stand at her side, risking the wrath of kings and council alike? Or would you whisper against her, fearing that her storm would one day turn upon you? Is she salvation, or rebellion? The fire hissed in the silence, the smoke curled like questions without answers, and her heart beat loud enough to drown them all. And you, yes, you listening, what would you choose? Would you have raised your hand to defend her, or turned away, afraid of what her strength would mean for your world? Because one truth lingered, undeniable and sharp as a blade in the dark. She could no longer be unseen, and the world would no longer be the same. If this story stirred you, if her fight set fire to something inside you, subscribe to Sophie's Romance Collections. Because here, we tell tales that burn. The dawn was cruel in its beauty. Pale light spilled across the broken square, painting the ruins in gold and grey, as if the sun itself was too afraid to choose whether to bless or condemn what had happened here. Smoke still curled from dying fires, the acrid scent mixing with the copper of spilled blood. The clan gathered in uneasy silence, their eyes darting between the woman who refused to bow and the king who had refused to condemn her. No voices rose now. No jeers, no chants, no accusations. Only silence, thick, suffocating, the kind that held more weight than any roar. She stood in the center of it all, battered yet unbroken, her breath fogging in the cool morning air. Her body trembled from exhaustion, but her gaze did not falter. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing weakness. Every scar, every bruise, every mark of violence on her skin became a banner, proof of survival. And though fear pressed against her chest like a blade, she held herself tall. For the first time in her life, they could not look at her and see only a victim. The king's shadow stretched long across the dirt as he stepped toward her, his face unreadable. His presence alone quieted even the whispers of the council. He carried the silence like a weapon, letting it weigh heavier with each second. His eyes were fixed on her, not as a judge, not as an executioner, but as something else entirely. The scar across his jaw caught the morning light, a reminder that he was not untouchable, not invincible, but still he stood with the strength of a mountain. And then, as if the earth itself chose to remind them all that peace was never more than an illusion, the ground trembled beneath their feet. A deep, guttural groan rolled through the stones of the square, rattling bones and stirring gasps from the weary crowd. Dust shook loose from the broken arena walls, scattering in the light like ash. Wolves lifted their heads, ears pinned back, a low chorus of uneasy growls rippling through the assembly. Her heart pounded. Not from fear of the trembling ground, but from the weight of what it meant. This was no accident. This was no aftershock of battle. The earth moved with intent, and everyone felt it. Then came the voice. Low. Drawn out. A whisper that seemed to slither from shadow to shadow, chilling the air with each syllable. She is not the only one. Every head snapped toward the sound. From the jagged remains of a colonnade, half collapsed and shrouded in smoke, a cloaked figure emerged. The fabric hung heavy, tattered with travel, black as charred bone. No face could be seen beneath the hood, only the glint of something sharp, eyes or flame, no one could tell. The king's body went taut, his shoulders squaring, his jaw locking tight. His hand twitched as though resisting the urge to reach for his blade. For once, the unshakable Lycan looked as though the ground itself had betrayed him. His aura flared with dominance, raw and dangerous, but beneath it, just for a flicker, was something rarer. Wariness. The woman felt it before she understood it, the shift in the air, the electric charge crawling over her skin, the instinctive knowledge that this figure carried a truth that could unravel everything she had just fought to prove. She drew in a shaky breath, her fists clenching even though her body begged her to collapse. Who are you? The king's voice boomed, low and thunderous, carrying the authority that had bent thousands to their knees. Yet the figure did not flinch. Instead, the whisper came again, soft but piercing, as though it was meant only for her ears, though every soul heard it. You are not alone. And this war has only begun. The words hung like chains in the air, binding the hearts of all who listened. A murmur rippled through the clan, fear, disbelief, and the first sparks of dread. For if she was not the only one, then what else lurked in shadows? What other storms brewed just beyond the horizon? Her pulse hammered, each beat screaming that the fragile ground she had claimed was about to crumble again. For once, she wished the whispers of prophecy had been true, because at least prophecy offered certainty. But this? This was something else. A war not chosen by fate, but born of secrets and survival, of power claimed rather than gifted. The king's gaze tore from the cloaked figure and returned to her, sharp and searching, as though demanding answers she did not have. She met his stare, refusing to look away. He wanted to see if she was shaken, if she would falter now that the world had tilted again. But she didn't. Even as her insides coiled with fear, she held herself steady. Because she had survived too much to shatter now. The cloaked figure's laughter, low, broken, bitter, echoed through the square before vanishing back into silence. By the time warriors surged forward, the figure was gone, swallowed by smoke and shadow as though the earth itself had reclaimed them. But the words remained. A stain. A scar. A promise. She is not the only one. The king exhaled slowly, his chest heaving with the weight of choices yet to be made. His people waited, their eyes torn between him and her, between fear and hope, between submission and rebellion. But he spoke no decree, no judgment. For the first time in his reign, he did not have an answer. She felt the shift. The fragile line between enemy and ally, between cage and freedom, had blurred beyond recognition. Whatever bond had sparked between them now burned hotter, tangled with danger neither could deny. And in that silence, she knew one thing with the clarity of fire in the dark: her battle was not over. It had only just begun. The earth stilled again, the dawn light stretching higher, but the hearts of those who stood in that square knew peace had slipped from their grasp. Something greater loomed, something that would test not only her will, but the strength of kingdoms, the truth of loyalty, and the fragile power of love. And as the first wolf howled into the trembling morning, her breath caught, her fists clenched, and her spirit whispered the vow she dared not speak aloud: this isn't over. Because wars are not ended in dawn's silence. They are written in the fire that waits just beyond it.